Hey folks, this is Kelani. There's been a whole lot of talk about the recent data mined subraces which may or may not be included in the next expansion. Things are still a little cloudy on where this is supposed to be going, but the general idea of subraces isn't a new one at all. We've talked about the different subraces currently in the game and how it could be a cool little addition if we could pick and choose between what kind of dwarf we want to be or what kind of elf we want to be. The subraces are in the game already, so is it a huge leap to make them available to the players? Well, the data mined information may point towards Blizzard making their first real moves when it comes to making subraces an actual thing. The data mined info comes from the game files we already have, so it's kind of buried in there, just waiting to become active and usable by our clients. Basically, there's a long list of races in the game, and the data included in the files marks them as playable or not playable, and 4 entries are marked as if they might be playable when we don't have access to them. These 4 races are the Nightborne, Highmountain Tauren, Void Elves, and Lightforged Draenei. Now, Highmountain Tauren and Lightforged Draenei are pretty self-explanatory, they're just different models and versions of a race we can already play. We've seen them in-game, we have models, we know how they're going to look. Nightborne is an interesting one because their models aren't actually designed to equip gear. All of their unique clothing and armor is actually a part of their model, so you can't really change anything about it. That means if the Nightborne are coming as playable races, or as a sub-race, then it would mean quite a bit of extra work creating some models which are designed to equip the gear the rest of us already have. I wonder if they will use a similar model and just tweak things a little bit, or if they'll make it entirely from scratch. I guess it depends on how many corners they want to cut in the grand scheme of things. If you're curious about which race the Nightborne would be a sub-race of, that's also answered in the data mined files. Each race has an entry which also dictates what background to show during character creation. The Nightborne are flagged with the Blood Elf background, meaning they might be tied entirely to the Blood Elves. Another interesting question would be how the questing works at the starting zones. When you think about sub-races as a whole, the starting quest zones don't really make that much sense for a variety of options like Dark Iron Dwarves or Mag'har Orcs. But for now, let's focus on what we have so far. You can draw quite a few similarities between the Blood Elves and a Nightborne. Addiction to magic and requiring an alternative source once their original source is destroyed is kind of the entire origin story of both races. You can also eavesdrop on a conversation between Liadrin and Silgrin, which maybe hints at the Nightborne joining up with the Horde. Adding them in as a sub-race instead of an entirely new race might save quite a lot of development time, even though I would argue the Nightborne kind of deserve their own little starting area. Reusing Suramar would be perfect, seeing as we're pretty much done with that entire area anyways. I think Nightborne as playable characters makes perfect sense. Void Elves, on the other hand, seem to have come out from nowhere. I know, Illyria, but that's one elf who dabbled in the Void against the wishes of quite a few important characters. It doesn't seem particularly safe, but the risk-reward might be entirely worth it. The Void has untold powers, and if you can tap into them without losing your mind, it seems like a huge font of power would be at your disposal. But that's why I don't think it makes sense as a sub-race. Illyria is the central focus for this. She's the one who helped us empower the Crucible, and she's the one who absorbed the Dark Naru at the end of the Argus dungeon. But she's also a main lore character, and I fully expect her power to be a focal point going forward. If you change the colour of your skin because you're touched by the Void, but don't actually get anything else, such as awesome Void powers, are you really a Void Elf in the same capacity as Illyria? I would think Void powers would be more suited to a new class, or maybe something extra for the Shadow Priests, but if all you're going to do is change the colour of your skin on an elf and call it a Void Elf, why not just have that as a skin colour option and leave it at that? It makes me think that Void Elves will have something more, something different, but besides voiceovers or animations, I can't really think of anything that would fit. Void Elves will also apparently be a sub-race of Night Elves, according to the data mined information, so I wonder if that's just something tagged on because the Blood Elves get the Nightborne. So my main question here would be, what does it take to be a sub-race? What are the requirements and which ones would we like to see? How much difference does there need to be from the base race to justify a sub-race being included? Mag'har Orcs or Dark Iron Dwarves are pretty much just a skin colour variation which could be included as such. Do we really need a sub-race option for those appearances to be included in the game? As I mentioned earlier, the only thing that wouldn't make much sense is the origins of each sub-race. Dark Iron Dwarves hanging out with regular dwarves in their starting zone might be a bit weird, but is that break in storytelling worth enough to create a new starting experience for any subrace that eventually makes its way into the game? If each new subrace needs a new starting area, maybe new voiceovers or even new animations, I could see why the dev team might hesitate to start adding them in. I would honestly be happy with just more customization in the character creation system. Variations like brown-skinned orcs, grey-skinned dwarves, ice trolls, or maybe even different corpses for the undead elves, or even just skeletons, can be handled with the customization options we have so far and wouldn't take as much development time, and I honestly wonder whether or not it would be any different in the long run. It would also make adding in any extra subraces we happen to come across much easier. Want some Grim Totem Tauren? New horns and some different skin colours. Boom! Fancy being a leper gnome? That should be easy enough to include. The ones that aren't as easy are probably a bit more interesting though, so maybe we can take a bit of a halfway mark. Some can be included as just customization, and the ones that actually require a bit more work can be worked in slowly but surely. Anything that requires a different model would take more time, so if you wanted to be a larger orc like Rexar, that would be a different story. If you wanted to stand up straight, that would take a bit more work too, but I honestly believe that more customization for our races via more options or sub-races can only be fantastic for the game. Blizzard could also take this opportunity to include new racial abilities for each sub-race introduced which add flavour to your choices. Obviously this could be a balancing disaster, but if things were kept simple and not too powerful, I imagine being able to do something special relating to your choice of sub-race could be really fun. Having decent choices to make during character creation could really shake things up. So we've gone on about how these would work, but what options could be included? Humans don't seem to have many options, but the first one that most people beeline for is the Vrykul, because they're the only race specifically tied to the humans. Humans came from Vrykul, so having them as a playable race or subrace would be pretty cool. The only other options would be humans from different areas of the game world. Two possibilities would be Gilneas humans, which haven't been infected or turned into Worgen, and then the kul'tiras humans would also be a cool addition if we end up going to kul'tiras. I guess the only thing you could change for those two options would be different voiceovers or special customization options like hair and jewelry. Dwarves have some pretty cool clans spread across Azeroth, which would be really cool to see as playable characters with unique tattoos and markings. If you want to take things one step further, you can look to the Frost Dwarves and maybe even the Earthen. Each have a unique look without moving away from that rustic dwarf base. Gnomes have a few obvious choices as well, though I'm not sure who would actually want to be a leper gnome. There's leper gnomes, sand gnomes, and even mecha gnomes. Having a few more options for our favourite race to punt can only be a good thing, right? Night Elves kind of stump me a little bit. Is there any significantly different type of Night Elf to warrant a sub-race option? You could separate the nature studying types and the arcane studying types, like before Cataclysm, but what visual differences would you include? The only thing I can think of which would be cool would be High Elves, pale skin and blue eyes, basically a Blood Elf but on the Alliance side, so they can have some pale skin elves. Draenei already have Lightforged as an option, but what about the Broken that we originally saw in the Burning Crusade? There's some new models which are used for quite a few of the Argus Draenei that were left behind, which could look pretty cool. A crazy possibility would be the Eredar. Swap the blue skin for some red tones and you're good to go. The Worgen have me stumped a little bit as well. Outside of having different variations in how the wolf looks overall, I can't think of any Worgen that look significantly different, so maybe it could just be an allegiance thing, like Shadowfang Keep Worgen or Gilneas Worgen. I don't know, but I would love to see some different options for Worgen in general. On the Horde side, orcs have quite a few options. You could go Maghar with brown skin, or any of the old Draenor clans that we saw in Warlords of Draenor, have different tattoos or markings like the dwarves, and that could be really cool. I know one choice that plenty of orc players would love is the option to straighten that back. Seriously, you can't dangle Thrall in our face this long without giving us the option to see a chiropractor as well. Tauren can also fall back on the whole bunch of tribes and clans they have, different markings or tattoos, or different horns like the Highmountain Tauren. You can even include the Tonka from back in Wrath of the Lich King or the Yongol from Mists of Pandaria. There's been so many variations to Tauren that they could honestly have their pick of the lot. Trolls are in a similar situation, with so many different variations having cropped up across the many expansions we've been through. Forest trolls, ice trolls, sand trolls, trolls that can wear shoes. That last one might be a lie, but there's also the Zandalari trolls, which are a little different from most of the others, and they look pretty damn cool. If we had to pick one, I'd probably pick Zandalari. The undead are an interesting one. Surely Sylvanas would raise pretty much anything to bolster her armies. I can see why Tauren undead or Orc undead could go down wrong or weirdly, but you can stick to the humanoid models and still get quite a few variations. Having undead elves would be pretty cool, or an undead in different states of repair could be interesting too. You could have fully formed humans like Nathanos Blightcaller, or completely decomposed with just a skeleton left. We've talked a little about Blood Elves, but there's a few options that could be included as well. There's a few variations of the Blood Elves that we've seen so far, like the Dark Fallen, though I wonder if they would fit more into Undead than into Blood Elves. There's also the Fell Blood Elves, which were tied to Kel'Thas Sunstrider, and the High Elves that we've already mentioned might fit better into Blood Elves. The last race is Goblins, who don't really have too much going for them. There's the aquatic type Goblins, the Gill Goblins I think, but I can't think of much else that would make a good sub-race for the Goblins. This all comes down to how much you value the story and lore. If you want to keep everything relating to story intact and for it to still make sense, I think that limits what we can really do. It doesn't make much sense for a lot of these options to be working together, but if you want to maximize the customization options and could ignore some of the bits and pieces which would give a lore nerd a bad time, we could be sitting on a gold mine of sub-races and new appearances to add over time. I can see how it could be a slippery slope though. We add in one or two now, but somewhere down the line there might be way too many options. I've seen a few games which basically let you do anything to your character, and while it's funny and cool for a while, some people always take it too far. I am really excited to see where they take this. We could be looking at a completely different World of Warcraft in a few years. As with pretty much anything that's talked about this month, we'll have to wait and see what happens at BlizzCon and whether they reveal their plans for the system, but that's it for this video. What sub-races would you like to see added to the world? Do you think adding more customization might alleviate the need for sub-races? Let me know what you're thinking in the comment section below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.